I was going to talk about American collecting of drawings, and in this vein, I just walked around and realized that of the 38 drawings on display here, only 7 had ever been in the United States, except for occasional brief visits, in a very few cases for exhibition, before we bought them. So what I thought I'd do is use these 7 examples, or some of them, to talk a bit about the development of drawings collecting in the United States during the last 30 or so years, though it will be briefer than this may advertise to you or you may fear. In this room, there are 2 collectors, 2 American collectors, who are represented. One was Curtis Baer, who was a German expatriate, came to the United States around 1940, and developed a small chemical company, and bought a collection over time of a few hundred drawings, which included 2 things that are on view here. One is the Agostino Carracci portrait of a partially blind woman over in red chalk right behind Philippe. And the other is this Titian drawing of 2 satyrs in a landscape, which has always been one of the drawings that I've most liked of the ones we've been able to acquire in recent times. Baer was not a very wealthy man, and his collection, like the collection of the second person I'm going to talk about, and I'll introduce that person and a bit discuss them together, was very European in the way that it developed. The second collector was John Steiner, who owned the Bronzino drawing over behind N. Just to introduce them, in greater detail, the Titian is a relatively early drawing, sort of Giorgionesque broadly, but not related in a precise way to a painting. And the Bronzino is a study for a prominent figure in his chaotic fresco of the Martyrdom of San Lorenzo of 1569. And the portrait of the woman is probably an independent work of art. There is no painting that we know that resulted from it. John Steiner was also a German expatriate who came to the United States around the same period. Also a businessman, what one would call today they were both what you'd call well-to-do people, not rich by any fair use of the word. And they both formed collections that encompassed hundreds of drawings. The ones that are here represent perhaps the top of their collections, but in a sense they misrepresent what they were doing because they weren't collectors who bought stars. They had a few stars each among the hundreds of drawings. Then there were dozens and dozens of very good drawings by a wide range of artists of many different schools. John Steiner more Italian and Netherlandish. Curtis Baer perhaps proportionally a bit more French and some more 19th century than Steiner. He had a bit more money, slightly different taste. But in fact, they both formed collections that were in the tradition of European collecting, which meant that the drawings were not mainly bought for exhibition. This was before the era in which collectors, the climax of a collector's career was an exhibition in a major museum with a big catalog. In those days, collectors of drawings and prints were a bit more like book collectors, rare book collectors. They kept the things in boxes or portfolios, showed them to visitors, looked through them themselves, and therefore the concept of whether a drawing was powerful really wasn't a resonant issue in those days. The other factor which one should mention as one talks about the history of collecting is money, an ugly subject but pertinent to buying things. And I don't know what Curtis Baer paid for the 2 drawings here because they were bought privately, but I do know that when John Steiner bought the Bronzino drawing in 1976 at Christie's, he paid £6,000 for it, which was then a significant amount of money, but not tremendous. I mean, it's more than it, obviously much more than it is today, perhaps, who knows tomorrow, but But even if one figures inflation and all these other things, it's still a much, much smaller amount of money proportionally. So that the other thing one learns from this is that in those days, in the 60s and 70s, and Curtis Baer began actually a little before that, one could be a serious drawings collector with some disposable money, but not a tremendous amount, something which is not true today. The only person or people who could buy a drawing like a Titian or a Bronzino of that type today would have to be a person of a very substantial wealth. Now here again in this second room, which consists of northern drawings that we acquired in the last decade and a half, there are two collectors represented. One was actually a friend whose drawing is behind Philippe, The View of Kalkar by Albert Cuyp. This belonged to a man named Fritz Marcus. Marcus was a Dutch immigrant, again a World War II immigrant, who came to the United States, was a banker in days when that was a lucrative profession, and became quite wealthy. And formed a large collection, fairly large collection of Dutch paintings and drawings, with a couple of other things thrown in, but sort of peripherally. In a sense, he was like Steiner and Curtis Baer, again an immigrant, again is someone who bought up and down the range of importance, so that the Cuyp and a Rembrandt drawing are the two stars, were the two stars of his collection. Then it sort of went gradually down in terms of quality from there. A nice Goldsmith drawing, a good Van Goyen, and so forth. And then there were also things of modest quality. Collectors of this kind, as was even more true of Baer and John Steiner, were perfectly happy to buy a drawing that was unimportant and unexhibitable because it caught their fancy for some reason. Either the subject appealed to them or it had some historical connection that was of some interest. Where Marcus was different is that he was a paintings collector as well, equally. He was at least equally devoted to his paintings, and every single drawing was framed and hung somewhere. The better ones in prominent places, the minor and uglier ones in little hallways that you had to dig them out, but everything was thought of as a work for exhibition, at least within his own home. And so here one sees an indication of something of a slightly different approach to collecting of drawings, which we see much more fully in the second collector in this room, who's represented by that, I think, very beautiful Adrian Ostade watercolor of an interior. This was a Rudolf Hyneman, whose widow, Laura Hyneman, bequeathed the drawing to us. Hyneman was a famous dealer. He was very much involved with Baron Thyssen in the formation of that collection, a very wealthy man, I assume, and an important paintings collector, as well as drawings collector. He had probably 100 drawings or so, perhaps a few more. Every single one of them was beautifully framed and presented throughout the house, and with one or two exceptions, perhaps the odd mistake, very few, everything was by an important artist. They were basically Tiepolo's, both Tiepolo's and Piazzetta were all represented heavily. And then there were a smattering of very, very fine Dutch drawings. The Ostade, I think, was the best. There was also a very beautiful Philips Koning watercolor, which I think now belongs to Jean Thaw. And this marks a transition, in a way, or the development of a different approach to collecting drawings, where historical interest is not terribly important. None of his drawings were bought because they were connected to a famous painting or fresco or anything of the sort, and they were all fairly substantial, beautiful drawings that stood out as works of art in and of themselves, quite apart from any connection, historical or otherwise, that they may have. And it is perhaps not entirely accidental that for many years Rudolf Hyneman was very closely associated with the much younger Jean Thaw, who is not represented here. His collection, of course, is at or going to the Morgan Library, but Jean has been very influential in moving collectors in this kind of direction, that one buys drawings where the individual aesthetic experience is tremendously important, and the art historical connection or the documentary value of a drawing is secondary or not terribly relevant. And this has been important in the collecting taste of certain collectors. One thinks of Ronald Lauder, Leon Black, people like that, who basically only buy what are perceived as very important drawings that have huge aesthetic punch. And that arises out of this tradition of not seeing a drawing in the old sense of the European print room or of the antiquarian object, but seeing it as not like a painting, but needing to have the same aesthetic appeal and power that a painting has. And this may also tie together with the at the beginning of an unending series of exhibitions of collectors' drawings, which were rare before about 30 years ago. Okay, and let's go into the last room. In this last room, we have the French drawings that have been bought in recent years, and there are two collectors, two contemporary collectors, who are important collectors represented here. The first is Karen Cohen, who has promised us this beautiful pastel by Delacroix. Karen, in certain ways, is an offshoot of what I call the European tradition of collecting drawings. She has hundreds and hundreds of drawings, a very, very strong holding of Delacroix, and collects Delacroix not only at his highest points, but collects him across the board, so that there are little scribbly drawings, things that are bought because they're tied to a painting in a church in Paris, and so forth, a sketchbook by him, and so on, is so that while many of them are beautiful drawings, very few are exhibited in her home, and they're bought in order to give great depth of understanding to one subject. Her favorite artist, obviously, Delacroix, but also to French draftsmanship of the 19th century, so that almost all her drawings, she has a few Mansholls and a couple of very nice Constable oil sketches, but aside from that, her drawings collection is almost entirely given over to French 19th century and to the artists who interest her as an individual choice, so that she neither aimed to create a curatorial collection with historical continuity, nor certainly a blockbuster collection where everything jumps off the wall and tells you how wonderful the collector is, but something which instead gives one great depth of understanding of an artist and of a certain aspect of the period. And finally, there's this portfolio, which was an unusual, I think, one of my favorite objects that we bought. It's not one of the best drawings, but it's one of my favorite objects. It's the actual portfolio that Gauguin used to walk around with when he made drawings himself in Pont-Aven, and which he decorated, and which, amazingly enough, the French government decided was not a national treasure when it was bought. We own this together with several of the drawings in there, including the Bronzino, together with Leon Black, who is, in many respects, the full embodiment of the blockbuster collector. I mean, if you go to his apartment, every single drawing jumps off the wall as a masterpiece, or aims to, and pretty well succeeds. And there is, as with the Jean Thor, Ronald Lauder tradition, a tendency not to care much about the art historical connections or associations of a work of art. Where, in a sense, he does differ is that, like many great European collectors in the past, has several collections, including a great collection of Chinese bronzes, so that it's a kind of strange, unexpected mix of material, not entirely curatorial and not entirely personal in the way that Karen Cohen's is. So that, I hope, gives some range of what's been happening in America. I think what one learns from this, and I hadn't really thought about it myself until yesterday in this way, is to what extent American collecting of drawing really emerged as a post-war phenomenon, as did American study of art history. There were very few good art historians in America, and there were very few good connoisseurs of drawings in America before World War II, except for a few people grouped around the fog. There was hardly anybody who knew anything about drawings in this country, and therefore the collections grew in a spasmodic way, with some great things coming in, a few here, a few actually at the Frick, and the great cache that Pierpont Morgan bought from Fairfax Murray that are the basis of the Morgan Library's collection till today. But in fact, American drawings collecting came together with the study of art history as a post-war and partially imported interest. Anyway, I should say, by the way, just to close, where's Philippe? There he is. A word about this, because it represents, in a way, what we've been doing the last 15 or so years in collecting drawings, and it may give the impression that we have been looking for stars, and that's it, and not that, as they say, there's anything wrong with it. But in fact, we have, at the same time, which is not here, been buying many hundreds of drawings by middle-level and minor artists, so that we've tried to maintain both traditions, and for which I think Philippe deserves a lot of credit. There are very few directors who understand drawings and beyond wanting a beautiful Watteau on the wall, and I think it's allowed us to buy and acquire some great high points, but also to enrich the collection according to the best traditions of the field.
How complicated is the joint ownership?
Not very, because we can do what we like. In other words, if we want something, we bring it here, and the conditions under which things are kept are ours. In other words,
so does the other owner, the collector, have possession of it for certain?
Yes, they have possession of it, but they can't do anything with it. I mean, they can hang it on the wall, but they can't restore it, lend it, unframe it, remat it.
And you go and visit it every now and again.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Philippe.
Colin Neisler, I think, is here, and you could correct me. Didn't Curtis Baer teach connoisseurship and drawings at the Institute of Fine Arts?
I hate to tell you, but I'm not sure of that. But may I ask another question, which is...
I think you're right, actually. I think he did.
Was the Schaefer Gallery not involved with these refugee collectors that you mentioned?
Yes, they were. They themselves being refugees during that period. Yes, absolutely. They were not the only ones. They were one of the main ones. Right. There were also others like Silberman and a few other galleries. Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you so much, George, and thanks to all of you. I think what I've learned today, our Center for the History of Collecting in America aspires to have the encyclopedic range, at least in its intellectual curiosity, as these wonderful presentations have shown us this morning. And we will have a chance to meet again later in the galleries, so I won't say a lot about the role of provenance as I'm hearing it, or that wonderful symbiotic relationship between the museum and future collectors and current day collectors. But simply thank you so much, and now let's adjourn temporarily anyway to lunch on the balcony so you can all feed those hunger pangs.